Everything I've ever done, I've done for the Imperium. But there's no room for glory in our service. The duty we carry is one of redemption, not honor. I come from Krieg, a world whose very name is synonymous with atonement. It was never meant to live, only to die for a sin none of us committed. I think back to our world before the war came. The soil was fertile, the air clean. It was a place where children played under the sun and the earth provided. But that was before the rebellion, before the Imperium's wrath turned the planet into a charred, forsaken husk. The years that followed were spent not in peace but in a cycle of punishment that no one could escape. We don't live for ourselves. We're born for one purpose only, to make the sacrifice worth the cost. The world we lived in, the world we fought for, is a graveyard now. The air thick with the stench of chemicals, the land turned to ash under the weight of artillery fire. Our cityscape is nothing but ruined buildings, crumbling structures that can barely support life, let alone any hope. The skies are a dull gray, like they're mourning a tragedy that never ends. We're born into this, raised with the knowledge that redemption lies in our deaths, and death is what we are taught to cherish. Gas masks cover our faces, concealing not just our identity but our humanity. We breathe the same air as the dying planet around us. There's nothing clean about it, only the constant sound of artillery fire, the rumble of the war machines, the thundering, relentless clash of forces in a battle that will never cease. It's as natural as breathing. It's all we've ever known. And in this world of perpetual war, we never get a moment to mourn. We can't afford to. There's always another trench to dig, another battle to be fought. For us, peace is an impossible dream. We don't know what it's like to walk on a world that isn't steeped in blood. We don't know what it's like to be free of the screams of dying soldiers, to be away from the choking ash that clogs our lungs. We only know war. And that's how we'll die, fighting like our fathers and their fathers before them, each of us sacrificing ourselves for the Emperor's glory. I remember before the war really began, there was a glimmer of peace in the way things were. But that was before everything changed. When the Imperium looked at us, they saw nothing but a broken world. A world too far gone to save. Our ancestors had rebelled, and so we paid the price. Generation after generation of men, women, and children born into a life of service. Not service to ourselves. Not service to anything personal. But service to an emperor who had abandoned us, who saw our world as expendable. I used to think the war was something noble, something to fight for. But as the years passed, I began to realize something far darker. Our existence was nothing more than a cog in the Imperium's vast machine. A cog meant to be replaced when broken, tossed aside when spent. And still we serve. Not because we want to, but because it's all we know. It's all we can do. The Emperor's will is iron, and we obey. We obey because it is the only way to ensure we are remembered. It is the only way to guarantee we will leave a mark on a universe that only values power, not compassion. As I look out across this land now, I realize that there is no escape. Not for me, not for any of us. Our duty is eternal, like the war we fight. And when we die in service. That is the way of Krieg. We do not mourn. We do not stop. We only fight until there is nothing left of us, until we are forgotten by all but the Emperor and those who come after. This is the world I was born into. A world where no one asks for life, but only for the opportunity to die for something greater. A world where no one hopes for peace because peace is a lie. This is Krieg. And this is the world we will never escape. I had always known what I was meant to be. In the Korps of Krieg, we are born for one purpose, to serve, not to live for ourselves. We are not individuals, we are a collective. The idea of self has no place in our world. From the moment we take our first breath, we are shaped by the will of the Imperium. Our identity is stripped away before we even have the chance to understand it. Death is not something to fear in Krieg. It is an honor. To die in service, to make one's life a weapon in the fight for the Emperor, is the highest accolade. It is not a sacrifice, it is a privilege. There is no greater duty, no higher calling than to offer your life as payment for the sins of your ancestors. We do not question why. To do so would be to undermine everything we are taught, everything we believe. The elders of Krieg spoke of it often, how the soil of our world was stained by rebellion, how the nuclear fires of our civil war had scarred the very earth we tread. We, the descendants of those who defied the Imperium, were born into a world that demanded nothing less than complete submission. The will of the Emperor was absolute, and we, the loyal few, would be the instruments of his vengeance. From an early age we were taught that we were nothing but tools. Tools of war, tools of atonement. Our names didn't matter. We were numbers, no different from the gears in the war machine. Each one of us was bred for one singular purpose: to die for the Imperium, for the glory of the Emperor. Our lives had no more meaning than that of the weapon in our hands. There was no room for individuality. There was only service, only sacrifice. The process began before we were even born. The most sacred duty in Krieg was to create the perfect soldier, one free of weakness. Eugenics programs were the backbone of our society. Every soldier was genetically crafted to be a weapon, strong, resilient, unwavering. The creation of the perfect soldier was the responsibility of the state. Every aspect of our lives was regulated, monitored, and controlled. We were conditioned from birth to serve, to fight, and to die. The breeding programs were relentless. Families were chosen not for love, not for connection, but for their genetic purity, for their potential to produce the next generation of soldiers. There were no fathers and mothers in Krieg, only breeders. The very idea of family was subverted. You were not raised in a household. You were raised in barracks, trained by the state. The moment we learned to walk, we learned to march. The moment we learned to speak, we learned the Imperial Creed. There was no love, no tenderness. Just the cold, hard discipline of war. And that discipline was absolute. No child of Krieg grew up in a world of warmth. We grew up in the shadow of our ancestors' sins, the weight of their failures bearing down on us. Our duty was to pay that debt in full. To fight and die in the name of the Imperium without hesitation, without remorse. We were stripped of any personal identity before we even had a chance to form one. We were assigned numbers, not names. To be called by a name was to imply we had value as individuals. But we did not. We were soldiers, nothing more, nothing less. Every soldier of Krieg was assigned a number upon birth, and it was that number that defined us. We were taught to respond to it, to answer to it as we answered to the call of duty. Our numbers were our identities, our purpose. Every soldier had a role, a purpose. Every role was vital to the machine of war. And so we learned, from the moment we could understand, that our lives meant nothing outside the battlefield. We existed to die for the Imperium. Every battle, every mission was a step closer to fulfilling our purpose. To die for the Emperor, to die for Krieg, was the highest honor. And to do so in service, without fear, without hesitation, was the greatest testament to our loyalty. In a way, we were never truly alive, not in the sense that others might understand. We were born for war, born to serve and to die. And when we died, we did not mourn. We did not weep for ourselves or our comrades. We knew in our hearts that our sacrifice was necessary. It was a part of the greater whole. We were all expendable. No soldier was more important than the next. Every life was a cog in the grand machine of war, and when one cog fell, another would take its place. But in the silence of our barracks, in the cold, lifeless world of Krieg, the true weight of our existence began to settle on us. As we grew older, we began to understand. We were not just soldiers. We were the last line of defense for the Imperium, the last hope for humanity. And we were willing to do whatever it took to fulfill that duty. To die, to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good, became not just our duty, but our very reason for existence. We were born to be tools of war, but over time we became something more. Our purpose became ingrained in us like a second skin. And when we looked in the mirror, we saw not just a soldier. We saw a number, a cog, a piece of the machine. And we accepted it, because that was all we were ever meant to be. A tool in the Emperor's hand, nothing more, nothing less. And so, as the war raged on, as we fought on countless battlefields, we continued our march, knowing that there would never be an end to the pain, the suffering, or the sacrifice. It was our fate, our duty. And in that duty we found our identity. A duty that was eternal, unyielding, and absolute. We had no other purpose but to die for the Imperium. And so we would die without hesitation, without regret. From the moment we were born, the Korps of Krieg began our shaping. It was not a gentle molding, nor was it a nurturing upbringing. The Kriegsman was not taught to become strong or capable in the ways of the world, but to endure. From the earliest years, we were stripped of everything that made us human. We learned to march before we could speak, to obey before we could think. And above all, we were taught to never fear, never hope, and never doubt. They did not need our bodies to be stronger, they needed our minds to be broken. The body is a tool. It can be trained, honed, and discarded without hesitation. It is the mind that must be shaped, reshaped, and destroyed. The first lessons were simple, brutal. Fear was the first to be eliminated. There was no comfort in Krieg's training. There was no softness to our days, no respite to our souls. We learned that fear was a weakness, a flaw that would render us useless in battle, useless to the Emperor. We were taught to walk without trembling, to stand in the face of death without the slightest flicker of hesitation. Fear was purged from us through pain, humiliation, and constant trial. If one faltered, one was punished. The punishment wasn't physical. No, it was far worse than that. It was emotional, mental. The punishment was the void that grew inside you, the loss of self. Hope came next. It was destroyed slowly, almost imperceptibly. We learned that hope was an illusion, something that had no place in our lives. We were told that to hope for anything other than our duty was to dishonor the Emperor. Hope is a seed that cannot grow in Krieg, for if it does, it will only sprout despair. So we learned to live without hope, to march without expectation, to fight without anticipation of reward. We knew that our lives were expendable, that the moment we stepped onto the battlefield, we had already lost. But it was in that loss that we found our purpose. We had no future to look forward to, only an eternal present where our duty would never cease. And doubt, oh, doubt was the most insidious of them all. To doubt the Emperor, to question the cause we fought for, to even think for a moment that there might be a better way, this was the greatest betrayal a Kriegsman could commit. Doubt meant weakness, and weakness meant failure. We were broken of this as well. Our training was a constant cycle of repetition and punishment, designed to crush any spark of doubt that might arise in our hearts. But the most terrifying part of the training wasn't the physical torment, it was the mental conditioning. By the time we reached adolescence, we were no longer individuals. We were part of something greater than ourselves. We were no longer Kalen or Marcus or Eliza. We were simply Kriegsmen, numbers to be counted, soldiers to be used. We existed to serve the Emperor's will, and nothing else mattered. When the final test came, it was not a matter of strength or skill. It was a test of our obedience, of our willingness to die. There were no swords, no armor. There was only death waiting for us. We were led into a battlefield where the odds were overwhelming, where survival was impossible. And yet, we were told we must fight. Fight until there was no more fight left in us, until we had nothing left but our bones and blood. We had no choice but to obey. To hesitate, to falter, to consider our own lives above the Emperor's will, this was the ultimate sin. And so, we fought, not for victory, not for glory, but for a moment of death that would prove our loyalty. The test was simple. Embrace death without fear, without regret. If we could do that, we had earned our place in the corps. If we faltered, we were discarded, our bodies left to rot on the battlefield. And most of us embraced it. For those of us who survived, the training was over. But in surviving, we had proven something far greater than our ability to fight. We had proven our loyalty. We had proven that we were unbreakable. We had proven that we were nothing more than instruments of war. Our spirits might have been broken, but our wills were unyielding. We had been forged into weapons of the Emperor's will, ready to fight and die without question. The hardest part of our training was not the physical pain, it was the realization that we had no purpose beyond death. The most powerful part of our training was the complete absence of self-preservation. To preserve oneself, to care for oneself, was a betrayal of the Emperor's will. To live was to dishonor the sacred duty we had been given. And so, we learned to live without fear, without hope, and without doubt. We learned to live only for the Emperor, only for the Korps of Krieg. This was the foundation of the Korps. We were born to die. And that was all we needed to know. The myth of the Death Korps of Krieg has long been misunderstood. To many, they are simply viewed as mindless soldiers, willing to throw themselves at the enemy in reckless suicidal charges, disregarding the value of their lives. The truth, however, is far more unsettling. The Korps do not charge into battle simply to die, nor do they embrace their deaths with mindless abandon. No, their doctrine is far more calculated. It is a doctrine steeped in duty, sacrifice, and the grim knowledge that they are cogs in a much larger machine, one that moves forward relentlessly regardless of the cost. The purpose of their sacrifice is never recklessness. It is an act of complete dedication to the Emperor. The corpsmen know that their lives are not their own to waste. Every charge they make is not a charge towards certain death for its own sake, but a charge made with purpose, driven by an understanding of the higher cost of war. When a Kriegsman goes into battle, he does not do so for glory or honor. He goes to fulfill his duty, to push the line, to secure a future for those who follow him, even if that future is not for him to witness. Their charge is not a reckless pursuit of death. It is a calculated, grim dance with fate, designed to maximize the sacrifice they must make. The concept of sacrifice is central to the Corps' belief system. They do not see death as an end, but as a necessary step towards victory. A soldier's life is but a small offering, one to be given freely to the Emperor. But it must be done with purpose. The corpsman who dies in battle does not die in vain. He dies knowing that his sacrifice is a part of the grand machine of the Imperium, that his death will pave the way for something greater, something lasting. The Corps are not motivated by heroism or personal glory. Instead, their motivation lies in the understanding that they are part of something far larger than themselves. They are simply tools, weapons forged for a singular purpose: to destroy, to defend, to fight. But to do this most efficiently, they must be willing to sacrifice not just their lives, but their very identity. They are willing to embrace death not because they fear it less, but because they understand the necessity of it. The Death Corps does not die recklessly, it dies with intent. Every death serves the greater good. This philosophy permeates their every action, even on the battlefield. For the Corps, every movement is a form of communication. Words are a luxury they do not have time for. Their actions, calculated, precise, deliberate, speak volumes. Every Kriegsman knows his role before stepping onto the field. There is no need for commands, for verbal orders. Their training has ingrained in them an instinctual understanding of their place in the greater scheme of the battle. When a Kriegsman moves forward, it is not the result of a shouted order or a desperate plea to advance. No, it is simply the embodiment of his grim duty. His actions communicate his loyalty to the Emperor and to his regiment. When a corpsman locks his gaze on an objective, there is no hesitation. When he moves into a firefight, there is no fear. It is not that the corpsman is immune to fear, it is that he has been trained to ignore it, to cast it aside as irrelevant. Fear is a distraction, a weakness. And so, the corpsman's silent resolve is what speaks most loudly on the battlefield. Even in the thickest of battles, the corpsmen do not speak. They do not shout orders, nor do they beg for mercy. Their communication is simple, direct, and silent. A signal in the form of a raised hand or the shift of a weapon tells everything that needs to be known. Their movements are a language of duty, and their grim determination is their most powerful weapon. The battlefield is their canvas, and every motion, every action, is a stroke of that grim picture. Consider the corpsman standing in the face of a bombardment, his trench filled with the screams of his comrades. There is no desperation in his eyes, no last-minute prayers whispered to the Emperor. Instead, he moves forward, a silent machine of war, his shovel gripped tight in his gloved hands. The shovel, so emblematic of the Corps, is both a tool and a weapon. It is not just used for digging trenches. It is used for killing, for clearing the way, for making a path through the blood and the chaos. The shovel is a testament to the corpsman's mindset, efficient, practical, and deadly. The corpsmen, however, do not fight just to kill, they fight to secure victory. Their every action is part of the greater struggle. They are not swayed by the screams of the dying or the wailing of retreating soldiers. They do not pause to mourn fallen comrades. Their duty is clear, they must push forward. The death of one is only another step towards the larger goal. They do not flinch at the loss of life. They do not hesitate at the destruction around them. They are soldiers, instruments of the Imperium, and they exist to serve, to fight, to die. The Korps of Krieg's philosophy is deeply rooted in the belief that their lives are meaningless, but their death is essential. Their silence on the battlefield speaks to this very fact. They are not there for personal gain, for glory, or for accolades. They are there for one reason and one reason alone: to die for the Emperor and the Imperium. The more they sacrifice, the greater their honor, the greater their duty. In the end, the corpsmen are not warriors, they are the embodiment of war itself. Their lives are not theirs to own. They exist to serve the Imperium in any way they can, even if it means laying down their lives without a second thought. Each sacrifice made by a corpsman is not an act of rebellion, nor an act of loss. It is an act of supreme loyalty, of duty that transcends the self. They are not heroes, they are martyrs. Martyrs who understand the cost of war and the necessity of their own deaths. And in the end, they will have made their sacrifice worthy. They may not speak, but their actions, every movement, every charge, every moment of their lives, tell the story of the Death Korps of Krieg. Their grim, unyielding duty is their most powerful statement, one that will echo across the battlefields of the Imperium for centuries to come. The uniform of the Death Korps of Krieg is more than just a practical set of equipment for war. It is the embodiment of their entire culture, their unwavering devotion, and their solemn commitment to the Imperium. Each piece of gear they wear is not simply functional. It carries a heavy, symbolic weight that binds them to their world, to their people, and to their eternal war. The uniform is a constant reminder of their sins, their unyielding duty, and the cost of redemption. Let's delve deeper into the most iconic elements of the Corpsman's uniform. The gas mask. The gas mask of the Corps is an iconic piece of their armor, instantly recognizable and deeply symbolic. It is not just a tool for protection against the poisoned atmosphere of Krieg or the deadly gases of the battlefield. It is a symbol of their penance. When you look at a Kriegsman, the mask is all you see. It covers their face completely, rendering them faceless, anonymous, and indistinguishable from one another. It strips them of their individuality, leaving only the cold, mechanized presence of a soldier. The mask itself is made of metal and leather, worn and weathered from countless battles. Its lenses are fogged with the sweat of the wearer and the toxic air they breathe, but they provide the Kriegsman with everything he needs to carry on: protection, isolation, and anonymity. There is a chilling detachment to the way these soldiers wear their masks, as if they are not even human anymore, but mere instruments of war. Their faces are hidden, their humanity obscured, replaced only by the grim task at hand. In this way, the gas mask serves as both a shield from the horrors of the battlefield and a constant reminder of the sins that brought them here. It is a tool that isolates the individual, rendering them as one piece in an endless, faceless machine of war. No soldier in the Corps stands alone. Each one is the same, stripped of identity, their actions controlled by a singular, relentless purpose: to serve the Emperor. The simple shovel. Perhaps the most symbolic and often misunderstood piece of equipment in the Corps arsenal is the shovel. To outsiders, it may seem like an odd choice for a soldier, but to a Kriegsman, the shovel is much more than just a tool for digging trenches. It is a weapon, a symbol of their brutal pragmatism and their dedication to the war effort. The shovel is a tool of utility, but also of last resort, a symbol of their relentless approach to combat and survival. The shovel is wielded with precision, used not only to dig but to fight. It is swung in desperation, used to cleave through enemies when ammunition runs dry or when the enemy has closed the gap. It is a stark, brutal weapon that reflects the Corpsman's no-nonsense approach to combat. The idea of a soldier using a shovel as a weapon may seem crude to some, but it is precisely this simplicity that makes it so effective. It is a direct, brutal means of survival, a tool used when all else fails. In the grim reality of the Death Corps, survival is not a matter of strategy or honor. It is a matter of using whatever is available, no matter how grim or savage. More than just a weapon, the shovel is a symbol of the Corps' practicality and their willingness to embrace death. It is an extension of their grim, utilitarian mindset. Death is inevitable, and it will come when the time is right. The shovel is the Kriegsman's final tool, the final act of defiance against a world that seems determined to crush them underfoot. With the shovel, they do not just fight for survival, they fight for a larger purpose, one that transcends their own mortality. The greatcoat. The greatcoat is the most enduring part of the Death Corps uniform. It is both a practical piece of clothing, designed to protect the wearer from the harsh, freezing cold of Krieg's unforgiving environment, and a symbol of their unending penance. The heavy long coat is made of thick wool, providing warmth and shelter against the frigid winds that tear through the war-torn world. Its dark color, usually deep gray or black, matches the grim mood of Krieg itself, the weight of the coat reflecting the weight of the soldier's eternal duty. The greatcoat, however, is not merely functional. It is symbolic of the burden that the corpsmen carry every day. It is a cloak of penance, a heavy, almost suffocating reminder that they are not merely fighting to survive, they are fighting to atone. Each corpsman wears this greatcoat with the knowledge that they are forever bound to a fate they did not choose, a fate dictated by the sins of their forefathers. The coat is a physical manifestation of this burden, its weight reminding them of the legacy of war they carry with them at all times. But it is not just the cold that the greatcoat protects against. It is the crushing weight of the past. The war that rages on is not just a war against enemies, it is a war against the sins of the past, the betrayal of the Imperium that still haunts the corpse. The greatcoat is a physical manifestation of the self-imposed exile the corpsmen carry. They wear it not just to shield themselves from the elements, but as a mark of their eternal penance, a reminder that they are fighting to redeem their world, to redeem themselves. The uniform of the Death Korps of Krieg is not just a set of tools, it is the very embodiment of their way of life. The gas mask, the shovel, the greatcoat, each one a symbol of the corpsman's sacrifice, duty, and unwavering commitment to the Emperor. These soldiers are not just fighting for survival, for glory, or for honor. They are fighting for redemption, for a future where the sins of their past can be erased through the endless sacrifice of their lives. The uniform of the corps is a constant reminder of the burden they carry, but it is also a symbol of their unyielding will and their willingness to do whatever is necessary to fulfill their duty. And when the time comes for battle, when the final march toward death begins, the corpsman does not hesitate. It is not a question of bravery, it is a matter of obedience. Their bodies, trained to endure pain and hardship, do not flinch at the idea of death. For them, it is simply the next step in the endless cycle of war. They are not afraid of the horrors they will face on the battlefield. They have been taught that fear is a weakness. Fear is what keeps them alive, and survival is not the goal. For the corpsman, survival is merely a delay of their inevitable fate. The battlefield is where the truth of their existence is fully realized. The once sterile world of training is replaced by the deafening roar of artillery, the shriek of lasgun fire, and the choking clouds of smoke that fill the air with death. In the face of these horrors, the corpsman is not afraid, nor are they excited by the idea of combat. They are numb to it. Their purpose is not to win, it is to ensure the Imperium's survival, and they know that every life lost in the process is a necessary sacrifice. There is no room for personal desires or glory here. There is only the relentless, grinding march toward an inevitable death. This is the grim reality of the Korps of Krieg. They are not soldiers in the traditional sense. They are not heroes, nor are they martyrs. They are tools created for a singular purpose. Their lives have no greater meaning than to serve the Imperium, to die for a cause that will never thank them, and to be forgotten as soon as they are gone. The corpsman knows this, and they accept it without hesitation. There is a bond in Krieg that is forged through fire, the kind that only battle can create. A bond not of friendship, nor of camaraderie in the usual sense, but of survival. In the heart of endless warfare, amidst the barrage of artillery, the screech of mortars, and the sharp crackle of lasgun fire, soldiers of the Death Corps stand shoulder to shoulder. They are not individuals, not in the way that people from the outside world understand. No, they are something different. They are extensions of the Emperor's will, bound by a single, unbreakable purpose: to serve, to fight, and to die for the Imperium. Each corpsman stands at attention, the rigid posture of the soldier as much a part of their identity as their mask and uniform. And while the world may see them as faceless, cold, emotionless tools of war, the truth is far more complex. Beneath the ironclad exterior, within the depths of their souls, is a shared understanding. A mutual recognition that, as long as they stand together, there is some small semblance of purpose. That is the true essence of their unity, the silent, wordless camaraderie built on the understanding that only together can they continue to survive. The faces of Krieg's soldiers remain hidden behind their masks, their eyes shielded from the world, yet, it is in those silent moments between battles where true connections are made. Each corpsman knows the weight of the rifle they carry is not just a weapon. It's a symbol of the life they have committed to, the lives of those who fight beside them. The bond that exists between them is born not from friendship, but from the brutal reality of combat. There is no greater force than the unity of these soldiers, bound by an unwavering devotion to their duty and to each other. In a way, that bond is the most human thing left in them. But it is a bond made not out of affection, but out of necessity. They rely on each other's strength, for without it, they would falter. Without their brothers in arms, a corpsman would not survive. It's not just the enemy they fight against. It's the crushing weight of hopelessness, the constant, unyielding pressure to fight, to never stop, to never give up. Together they push forward. Together they endure. But here lies the horror. The deeper, darker truth of Krieg's fanaticism. That each soldier, every one of them, is stripped of their individuality. Their names are lost to the system, replaced by numbers. Their faces are hidden beneath gas masks, their humanity obscured by the heavy burden of duty. They are no longer individuals with their own thoughts, their own desires, their own fears. They are soldiers, faceless instruments of war. The very bond that holds them together, their unyielding loyalty to each other, is built upon the erasure of who they once were. The camaraderie they share comes not from choice, but from a grim, twisted need for survival. They fight, die, and live not as men, but as cogs in an unstoppable war machine. And this is the heart of Krieg's horror. This is the price of their sacrifice. In the eyes of the Imperium, they are not soldiers with families, with lives, with futures. They are tools. And yet, in their silent brotherhood, in the camaraderie they share, they find a small, fleeting sense of humanity in the darkness. But it is a humanity that has been stripped of everything except duty. The bonds they form, those invisible threads between brothers, are a quiet testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit, even in the face of such overwhelming, crushing brutality. They fight side by side, their lives inextricably linked, and even as they fall one by one, they never falter. Their sacrifices are woven together into a tapestry of shared pain, shared loss, and shared duty, a testament to the enduring will of the Death Corps. But that bond is a paradox. For in the end, as they march towards their inevitable fate, it is not the fight that defines them, but the relentless march of time. As long as the Imperium endures, so too will the Death Corps, ever loyal, ever dutiful, but never truly free. Their lives, their deaths, are sacrifices made in the name of something greater than themselves. And the true horror lies not in the death they face, but in the fact that they will never be remembered as individuals. They will always be part of something larger than themselves, part of the endless war, bound by the silent call to serve and die in the name of the Emperor. The battlefield was a maelstrom of chaos, the air thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder, burning flesh, and the metallic taste of blood. The corpsman's heart did not race. There was no fear here. No excitement. Just the relentless, mechanical drive of duty. His gas mask obscured his expression, but his mind, cold and detached, took in the horrific landscape before him. Xenos, twisted and alien, surged forward like an unrelenting tide, their grotesque forms tearing through the war-torn earth with the fury of a species hell-bent on destruction. Their unnatural screeches echoed through the battlefield, a terrifying sound that cut through the gunfire and explosions. The corpsman, however, was unmoved. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. His hands, stained with the blood of countless foes, gripped his lost gun with mechanical precision as he took aim and fired. The world around him was a cacophony of death. Soldiers from both sides fell, their bodies twisted and broken by the brutality of the conflict. The corpsman watched as a comrade to his left was engulfed in a hail of plasma fire, his body disintegrating in an instant. He felt nothing. The moment passed without acknowledgement, his focus returning to the next threat on the horizon. The battle raged on, relentless and unforgiving, but to the corpsman, it was simply the inevitable continuation of a duty he had long ago accepted. The enemy was everywhere, crawling over the wreckage of the battlefield like rats, a swarm of savagery intent on consuming all in its path. The Xenos were fierce, their unnatural bodies twisting and writhing as they tore through Imperial lines. The corpsman's comrades, hardened by years of training and sacrifice, stood unwavering in the face of the onslaught. They did not retreat. They did not falter. They knew no other way but to fight and die in the name of the Emperor. The brutality of the conflict was unimaginable. The Xenos showed no mercy, ripping through the ranks with claws and teeth, their bodies no more than weapons of terror and destruction. Yet the corpsman moved through the battlefield with cold efficiency, his every action a reflection of the grim philosophy drilled into him since birth. Death was his duty, and it came for him as it came for all soldiers of Krieg, not with ceremony but with inevitability. The devastation was immense. The ground beneath their feet trembled with the force of explosions, the very air alive with the screams of dying soldiers and the roar of battle. There was no safety, no reprieve from the carnage. The landscape was a shattered wasteland, strewn with the bodies of friend and foe alike, consumed by the unyielding violence of the war. The corpsman, however, was undeterred. To him, the war was not a tragedy, it was simply the reality of existence. The fight was endless, the casualties countless, but his purpose remained unshaken, to die for the Imperium, to serve the Emperor with unflinching resolve. As he moved through the battlefield, he came upon the remains of an enemy vehicle, its twisted metal frame charred from the fury of combat. The stench of burnt flesh mixed with the sulphurous smoke that filled the air. He did not pause to consider the life that had once been within it. He did not mourn the fallen. There was only the next objective, the next target, the next moment of sacrifice. The corpsman raised his weapon and continued to fire, his focus absolute. His thoughts were singular, to kill or be killed. The enemy's fury was unmatched, but the corpsman's resolve was greater. As the Xenos pressed their attack, the corpsman and his fellow soldiers held their ground, fighting not for victory but for survival, for redemption. The realization struck him then like a heavy blow. This was not just war. This was a world built on killing, where the only way to survive was to end the life of another. There was no glory in this, no honor. Just the ceaseless grind of battle, the endless tide of enemies that would never stop. In the midst of the carnage, the corpsman felt the weight of his purpose settle heavily upon him. He was not fighting for a noble cause or a righteous victory. He was fighting because it was all he had ever known. The war was the fabric of his existence, and death, not victory, was the only thing that awaited him. The enemy's fury was endless, but so too was his willingness to sacrifice. In this world, where killing was the only answer, there could be no retreat, no surrender. There was only the fight, the inevitable loss, and the silent acceptance of death that came with it. The war would never end. The enemies would never stop coming. And the corpsman would be there, standing shoulder to shoulder with his comrades, his gas mask hiding his humanity, his body a weapon for the Emperor's will. The air was thick with tension as the Commissar's heavy boots echoed down the trench. Every step seemed to crush the very hope that dared to stir within the hearts of the men. The corpsmen of Krieg stood like statues, their gas masks hiding their fear, their eyes hollow beneath the visors. No one dared speak, for to speak was to invite attention, and attention meant punishment. The Commissar's presence was a constant reminder of their true purpose, not to survive, but to die in service to the Emperor, and to die without question. The Commissar, a figure of absolute authority, towered above them, his uniform immaculate, his lost pistol hanging from his belt, his eyes cold and unwavering. He was a living embodiment of the Imperium's will, a figurehead of fear and discipline. He walked among them, silent and calculating, his gaze sweeping over every soldier. There was no room for error, no room for hesitation. His word was law, and disobedience was not an option, it was an affront to everything they stood for. And to defy him was to forfeit everything: their duty, their lives, and their place in the grand design of the Emperor. The Commissar's role in the corps was not just to command but to instill fear. Fear was the lifeblood of the regiment, and the Commissar was its greatest tool. The soldiers of Krieg did not fear death, but they feared what came before it, the wrath of the Commissar. For failure meant not only death, but an agonizing, humiliating end. The Commissar would ensure that a soldier's death was swift, efficient, and purposeful, but only if the soldier had served with unyielding obedience. Those who faltered, who hesitated or questioned, would find themselves facing a fate far worse than any battle. The punishment was final, their death a lesson to the others. The sheer brutality of the Commissar's presence was an ever-present shadow over the corpsman's life. They knew that if they faltered, if they allowed even the smallest doubt to take root in their hearts, they would be made an example of. And the example would be swift, often lethal. The Commissar did not waste words on failure. His actions spoke louder than any reprimand ever could. One failed soldier was enough to send a message to the rest of the corps. The Commissar's word was final, and his judgment was absolute. It was not that the corpsmen feared the Commissar's violence. No, the true fear lay in what failure meant. The corpsmen understood that death was inevitable, that sacrifice was the currency of their service. But what they feared most was the shame of failure, the dishonor of not fulfilling their duty. The Commissar's stern face, his unwavering gaze, was a constant reminder of the line they walked. Fail and you die in disgrace, not as a soldier, but as a disgrace to the Emperor himself. The Commissar's presence, then, was both a shield and a sword. It was a shield for the corpsmen who needed to know that, in the end, their sacrifice would be honored. It was a sword for those who dared step out of line, a reminder that obedience was not optional. The Commissar ensured that the corpsman's sacrifice was not in vain, that every soldier's death would be for a purpose greater than themselves. And so the men stood in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of what awaited them. They knew that their role in the grand scheme of the Imperium was small, but it was vital. The Commissar reminded them of that truth with every step he took, with every piercing look he cast. There was no room for questioning. There was only the work ahead, the unyielding march toward a death they could never escape, but one that would be borne with honor, as the Commissar ensured it would be. Failure was not an option. For those who fell short of their duty, the end was swift and the lesson was clear. Death was not just inevitable, it was the reward for unwavering service. And the Commissar's presence would be the final reminder of that truth. The aftermath of the battle was no different than the countless others before it. The once chaotic battlefield, now eerily quiet, lay littered with the corpses of both friend and foe. The ground was churned to mud, stained with the blood of the fallen, both Imperial and Xenos alike. There was no triumph here. No celebration. There was only the silence that followed the storm, the heavy weight of another victory paid for in the most brutal of currencies, death. The corpsman stood in the midst of the carnage, his gas mask concealing the emptiness of his expression. His body was weary, his limbs sore from hours of unrelenting combat, but his mind was as cold and unfeeling as the weapon he carried. Around him, the battlefield was littered with the twisted remains of enemies, their bodies broken and torn in the wake of the corps' relentless charge. But even in victory there was no peace. There never was. The battle had been hard fought, but it was only one of many. The Corpsman knew this better than anyone. The Imperium was an eternal war machine, and every victory was simply another step toward the next battle. He had no illusions about it. His sacrifice and the sacrifice of his comrades meant nothing more than the continuation of the cycle. Another planet was saved. Another war won. But in the end it was just another war. Another battle in an endless chain. The sight of the dead bodies did not faze him. They were nothing more than statistics, part of the inevitable cost of victory. He had seen too many of his fellow soldiers fall, their bodies reduced to mangled heaps on the battlefield. Some were buried with the honor of a quick, clean death. Others, like the ones scattered across the mud before him, were left where they fell, a silent testament to their sacrifice. Victory in Krieg, the Corpsman realized, was an illusion. It was a fleeting moment of respite before the next battle, the next wave of enemies to be fought. There was no rest for soldiers like him. No time to mourn, no time to reflect on what had been lost. The war was never over. Even when the battle ended, the war raged on. The price of victory was always the same: more death, more sacrifice. As he looked across the battlefield, he knew that tomorrow would bring another conflict. Another fight to the death. Another moment of unbearable sacrifice. And when the battle ended, there would be no victory to savor. No medal to wear, no honor to claim. There would only be more bloodshed, more death. The cycle was unending. The Corpsman took a deep, steadying breath, the stale air from his gas mask filling his lungs. He did not feel fear. He did not feel joy. He felt nothing. His role in this war, like the role of every other soldier on Krieg, was clear. They were born to fight and die for the Emperor. That was all. That was enough. But as the darkness of the battlefield closed in around him, a quiet realization began to take root deep within his mind. His body was just another cog in the vast machine of the Imperium. His death would mean nothing more than the loss of a tool, a weapon to be replaced in the next battle. His life, his sacrifice, would be forgotten by all but the Emperor. There was no glory here. No honor. Only the relentless, grinding march of war. Victory, the Corpsman understood, was a fleeting illusion. It was not something to be celebrated, for in victory there was always more sacrifice. More death. And when the war was over, when the last soldier had fallen, the machine would continue to grind forward, seeking new enemies, new worlds to conquer, and more lives to sacrifice. The cycle was eternal, unbroken. The price of victory, as always, was more death. And so, the Corpsman, silent and unfeeling, began to march once again, the weight of his duty pressing down on his shoulders like 1,000 tons of stone. He was just one soldier in an unyielding army. His task was simple: fight, die, repeat. And so, the cycle continued. The price of victory was eternal, just as the war was. The Corpsman stood silently in the midst of the battlefield, the dirt beneath his boots thick with the memories of fallen comrades. Around him, the echoes of the endless war continued. The sounds of battle, the roaring engines of destruction, the screams of dying enemies and allies alike, were the only constants. Yet, for the Corpsman, there was no place for sorrow. There was only duty. He had always known that his life was not his own. From the moment he had been born, he had been trained to die. His name was not important. It was only the uniform, the purpose, the Emperor's will. His personal desires had long been extinguished, leaving only the cold, unwavering commitment to the mission. He had given his life willingly, knowing full well that it was not for glory or for recognition. It was for the survival of the Imperium. For humanity. For something greater than himself. Now, as the dust settled over yet another conquered battlefield, the Corpsman found himself reflecting on the legacy he would leave behind. What would he be remembered for? What would his name, his sacrifice, amount to in the grand scheme of things? Would anyone care when he was gone? Would anyone honor his death, or would he simply be another faceless soldier, lost to the void of war? But there was peace in this realization. His legacy was not about the accolades or the monuments that others would build in his honor. His legacy was simple: to serve, to fight, and to die for the Emperor. That was all. That was enough. The Corpsman was a part of something far larger than himself, an eternal cycle of duty, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. He would be forgotten by history. But his service would endure. The Corpsman knew that his sacrifice would live on in the hearts and minds of those who fought beside him, who picked up the mantle and continued the war. His legacy was not in the past but in the future. And as long as the Imperium stood, the Corpsman's legacy would never truly end. The battlefield lay quiet in the wake of the latest campaign. The Corpsman walked through the remains of the field, the bodies of the fallen scattered like so much discarded refuse. His own comrades lay dead, their sacrifice no different from his own. Their bodies would be left behind, forgotten as the war raged on. Yet, in the corpsman's heart there was no fear of death. He had embraced it long ago, the inevitability of his fate etched into his soul. It was not an end, but a continuation. His death would be another step in the eternal cycle of service to the Emperor. He understood now, more than ever, that death was not a finality. It was simply another duty. The corpsman's death, like the death of every other soldier who had come before him, would serve a purpose. His death would fuel the war machine, the endless struggle for survival that defined the Imperium. His mind drifted to the thousands who had gone before him, the warriors, the soldiers, the nameless ones who had died in service to the Emperor. They too had thought their death would be the end. But it wasn't. Their legacy lived on in the fight, in the unbroken will of the corpse. The Emperor's will had never faltered, and neither would the corpsman's. As he took a breath, the wind carrying the stench of death and decay, the corpsman knew that his death would not be the end of his duty. He would become part of something greater. His body returning to the earth, his spirit continuing in the eternal service of the Imperium. Standing on the edge of the battlefield, the corpsman looked out across the ruined landscape. Around him the war raged on. There was no victory here, only endless conflict. But this was their world. This was what they were born for. The death corps of Krieg were not heroes. They were not martyrs. They were instruments of the Emperor's will, tools of war forged in the crucible of eternal conflict. Their lives, their deaths were not their own. They existed to serve a higher purpose, to fight and die so that humanity could endure. There was no glory in this. There was no celebration. The corpsman had never expected such things. His sacrifice, like the sacrifices of all those who had come before him, was simply part of the larger machine of the Imperium. The Emperor did not demand his life be celebrated. He only demanded that it be given. The corpsman turned away from the battlefield, the weight of his rifle a constant reminder of his duty. He had no illusions of grandeur. His life would not be remembered. His death would be a footnote in the endless war. But it did not matter. His sacrifice was not for himself. It was for the Emperor, for humanity, for the Imperium. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. With one final glance at the horizon, the corpsman readied himself for the next battle. There would always be another. Another fight. Another death. The cycle would never end. And in that there was peace. There was duty. There was the Emperor's will. The death corps would march on. And so too would their duty.